Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic. Which is, what if Naruto was the son of Yami and became the strongest Shinigami? Naruto Harem Story, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Naruto followed Neji down the hall towards the classroom in silence. Neji was scared of this guard. From what he had heard in the office, he was a Shinigami as well as the son of the goddess Yami. Looking up at Naruto, Neji couldn't help but wonder what things has he done for the world. On the other hand, Naruto was thinking, who did he piss off to deserve this? He did not want to spend a long time guarding a smart brat as he class. Neji, finally fed up with the silence, asked, "So what does a Shinigami do?" Naruto looked at Neji with shock. "What does a Shinigami do?" he stated as they walked, trying not to grab one of his kuni and stabbing Neji with it. A Shinigami job is to collect the souls of the dead and send them to their correct resting place. We are the Grim Reapers, the person everyone must meet at the end. Neji looked at him in horror. The collector of souls, does that mean he is here to collect my soul? He thought as he began to freak out. Naruto watched the little boy got very scared and step away from him. "I am not here to collect your soul," Naruto said after getting tired of watching Neji freak out. "My superior assigned me to this mission, so it's my job to guard you and your class till I am told otherwise." Neji heard this and started to calm down, but was still weary of the older boy. He suddenly remembered what was he going to tell the class about Naruto. Naruto, Neji said as they walked. "What?" Naruto answered with a sigh. Neji was silent for a moment, thinking about what he was going to say. What should I tell the class about you? That you are here to be an assistant teacher and..." "Hell no," Naruto stated with a vengeance. "I am not here to teach a bunch of kids, I am here to guard, and that is what I am going to do. No cover stories, except for my job title, just me standing there guarding, that's it." "But," Neji started to say, but Naruto cut him off. "I am here to guard, that is." Neji just nodded as they walked. He looked at his watch and saw class was about to start. He headed towards the classroom with Naruto following close behind. Nadoko was not having a good day. She had woken up this morning feeling relatively small, and ever since they got back from the Kyoto trip she had not been herself. During the trip she confessed her love to her teacher Neji Springfield but was rejected outright. After that she had spent the entire trip in a book, or crying to herself. Not wanting to face him, she had regressed back to the point where she only talked when called upon or when talking to her friends. She looked around the classroom and remembers back to this morning. Now she was sitting in class waiting for Negi-sensei to come in and start the lesson. After a few minutes of reading, the door to reveal the red-headed 10-year-old, but he was not alone. Walking in behind he was the young man from this morning. He had a look of boredom on his face as he entered the room and surveyed the area. He stood by Neji and waited for the rest of the class to quiet down before introducing the blonde. "Good morning everyone," Neji said to his class with a smile. The class replied with the same greeting and wait for him to talk again. Making sure he had everyone's undivided attention, he began to introduce the blonde. Gather his thoughts, he began. "This is Naruto, he will be acting as our class bodyguard from now on." He paused for a moment to see the class's reaction. At first most of them didn't know what to make of that statement. A few such as Mana, Ked, and Setsuna looked at the blonde with contempt and intrigue. Others such as the cheerleading trio wondered if he was single. Then there was Asuna, she was confused to why they need a bodyguard in the first place. "Why do we need a bodyguard?" Ayana asked with anger in her voice. "We never need one before." Naruto looked at the orange-haired girl with a cold smile, causing her to feel a deathly chill. "You don't need to know why, just that you are going to be guarded by me from now on." Asuna was not pleased with that answer and was going to try and get more out of him, but the bell for class to start rang. Nadoko watched the whole exchange with interest. Most people never gave Asuna the cold shoulder, but this bodyguard was doing just that. "But when he was helping me he was so nice," she thought to herself as class began. Naruto looked at the class as he sat in the corner. They seemed to be a very spirited bunch. The orange-haired girl was quite feisty but need to control her anger. As he looked towards the back of the room, a few of the girls stood out to him. There was 3 in back that looked to have some form of combat training by the way they carried themselves. Another was a girl next to the opposite wall. He noticed her when he first came in. It was the girl who he knocked down this morning. She had her head buried in a book. As he watched her, he couldn't help but blush. She is kinda cute, he thought to himself, but stopped that train of thought before it got any further. Can't think about that, he braided himself. Sighing, he pulled out his folder and reread it. She had to send me to an all-girls school. Thanks a lot, Mom, he muttered sarcastically. The day wore on slowly as Naruto watched and took notes on the girls and which ones were going to be trouble. So far he had a few on the list. Asuna, she seemed to always cause trouble. No matter what happened, it seemed that she was the cause of it all. There was one whom seemed to try stopping it but made it worse when Asuna blew up, and that was the blonde in the front. Her name was Ayaka Yukihiro, the class rep. No matter what happened, she would always try and stop Asuna, but it made matters worse. As the day came to a close, Naruto was planning on talking to both Asuna and Ayaka in hopes of saving his last bit of sanity. Everyone was so glad the day was over, but they have yet to leave their seats. Everyone was watching the new bodyguard. He sat in a chair by the window and seemed to not notice them staring at him. Naruto looked up and saw the entire class staring at him. Okay, what's going on? He thought to himself as he faced the class. Standing up, he said, "May I help you?" That was all they need to jump him. Soon he was in a pile of girls pulling him every which way, not noticing how closely they pushed themselves against him. This feels nice, Naruto thought as he lost himself to them for a few moments, but he came back to his senses and quickly detangled himself from the pile. Catching his breath, he looked at the girls inside. A girl with red hair and a camera rushed over to him and held a tape recorder to him. "My name is Kazumi Asakura. Reporter, is it okay if I ask a couple of questions?" she said to him quickly. Naruto just nodded. Kazumi smiled and took out a notebook before starting her questions. "How old are you?" she asked him. 17. "Where are you from?" "A place far away." "What brings you to Mahora?" "I am the class's new bodyguard." That was explained when I first walked in the door, he said with a sigh. "Okay, now for the most important question," Kazumi said and paused for dramatic effect. "Do you have a girlfriend?" Wait, what?" he replied, giving the redhead a questioning look. "Do you have a girlfriend?" she asked again with a glint in her eye. "Is that really relevant to why I am here?" he asked her, debating on whether he just might reap her soul over this. "Of course it is," Kazumi replied with passion. "The masses need to know about the bodyguard on campus, and this is vital information." "I really don't think it is that vital," Naruto stated to her, and turned to leave, but Kazumi was in front of him. "Please?" she asked, giving him the puppy dog pout. Must resist urge to give in, Naruto thought to himself, but to no avail. "Damn cute girls," he muttered before sighing in defeat. "No, I do not have a girlfriend." Kazumi was jumping for joy in her mind when Naruto finally answered the question. She looked at him, then thought of something devious. "No, Naruto, I have one last question for you." Naruto looked at the girl and felt that it was time to leave, but again against his better judgment he stayed and waited for the question. Kazumi saw that he was ready and chuckled inwardly. "Okay, if you could date anyone of the girls in this class on a date, who would it be and why?" she asked, and Naruto faced paled. All the girls were looking at him waiting for his answer, while he wanted nothing more than to leave. He began to back away towards the door with the girls following him when Negi walked in. "Naruto, the headmaster want to see you," Negi said, and looked at the class wondering what was going on. Naruto inwardly thanked Negi for the distraction, allowing him to get away. He headed towards the door and said, "Boss is calling, got to go." Before anyone could stop him, he was out the door and on his way to the headmaster's office. Kazumi cried anime tears, sad she did not get her question answered. Naruto headed down the hall, glad he had gotten away from the interrogation he was receiving from the girls. As he walked into the office, he noticed 3 girls for the class standing next to the headmaster. The first had long dark hair with dark tan skin and an athletic figure. The second had short blondish hair, had a very pretty face and a nice figure, and lastly there was short-haired girl with a small figure carrying a bokken. Naruto walked towards the headmaster and the 3 girls never took their eyes off him. "What can I do for you?" Naruto asked with slight curiosity. The 3 girls were the one he had pegged with combat experience, and now they were standing there glaring at him. Kono looked at Naruto for a moment before he spoke. These three are here regarding your job position and were wondering if you could clarify a few things for them. Naruto nodded and faced the girls before he asked, "Who might you three be?" The dark-skinned girl looked at him with interest and disdain. "Mana Tatsumiya," she said. The blondish one looked at him with expectations. "Kaide Nagase." The one who carried the bokken looked at him with contempt. "Setsuna Sakurazaki." Naruto smiled before he said, "You already know who I am, so what can I do for you three today?" Mana was the first to speak up. "The headmaster told us he was the one who hired you, but he had yet to say why. Do you know anything about that?" She asked him. "Not at all, I was just assigned this mission by my superiors," Naruto answered honestly. Mana didn't seem satisfied with that answer but backed off. Setsuna was the next to ask, "What skills do you have that makes you qualified to guard?" "I have many skills, some I do not wish to tell to anyone," he said, leaving it at that. "If you are not going to tell me your skills, then you do not seem qualified to guard," she said. "And why do I have to expose my skills to a couple of school girls?" Naruto retorted, trying to hold in his anger. "We have been guarding the class in this school and we do not need you," Setsuna said. Naruto's anger began to rise, but he kept a calm demeanor, hoping to end this peacefully. "Well, then you haven't done a very good job of it, since they brought me on to help," Naruto said, shaking his head. Setsuna fumed and began to raise her bokken when she was stopped by Kaide. Kaide looked at the new bodyguard and smiled. "I'm sorry for my friend here, she just doesn't get why you are here," she said to Naruto, "but as a sign of good faith, would you be willing to spare with us so we can gauge your skills?" Naruto thought about it for a moment. A spare meant that he could showcase some of his abilities while learning about theirs. "Sure, I up for it," he said with a smile. Kono smiled. This was a chance to see a Shinigami in action. Kaide, Mana, and Setsuna smiled because they were going to show him who was the best. Naruto just stood there wanting to get to the spare so he can find someplace to eat. "The spare will take place at the base of the world tree in an hour," Kaide said and headed for the door. Naruto just nodded and waited for them to leave. Once they were gone, he started to leave as well, but Kono stopped him. "Naruto, I have a list of living arrangements I like you to take a look at," he said and handed Naruto some papers. An hour later, Naruto walked up towards the base of the world tree, grumbling under his breath. As he made his way up there, he noticed Mana holding an assortment of different guns and munitions. Setsuna was holding a very long blade, and then there was Kaide, was wearing a tight-fitting suit and ninja sandals with a large shuriken attached to her back. They finally noticed Naruto and gave him a collective glare. Shaking it off, he walked over to them. Taking a few kuni from his pouches, he held them in reverse position. "Shall we get started?" Setsuna wasted no time and was the first to attack him in a flurry of strikes. Naruto nimbly dodged most of them and blocked a few. He waited for right moment to strike when she was bring her blade in a downward slash. He blocked with his right kuni and kicked her away hard. She stumbled back a feet only to have him start to attack her. He kept her on the defensive with a use of taijutsu in his kuni. Setsuna was getting frustrated. He would always dodge her attacks and now he had her on the defensive. She began to build up power, but Naruto wouldn't have it. Jumping back a few feet, he put his hand together and said, "Bakudo number 1, Sai." Setsuna instantly felt her arms pull to her back, causing her to fall on the ground in surprise. Naruto walked over and picked up her sword that she dropped, put it next to the tree. Suddenly a sound of a gun firing filled the air, causing Naruto to dodge into cover. "So we have a gunsmith," he said as he peeked out of his hiding spot only to be forced back behind the tree. Mana was set up a half a mile away with her sniper rifle out. She watched how quickly Naruto took out Setsuna, and he even used a strange form of magic to bind her arms. As she looked through the scope, she saw that he hadn't moved from behind the tree. She wondered what he was up to but decided to play it safe and signaled for Kaide to attack. The ninja appeared to be her friend and nodded, heading towards Naruto's hiding place. "She a very good shot," Naruto thought as he was pinned down by Mana. Constant barrage of bullets. He tried to peek out to see where they were coming from but quickly went back into cover. Suddenly he felt the air around him begin to move and he had to jump out of the way of a large shuriken that flew past, only to have to block a kick to the head. He pushed of his attackers so he could dodge Mana's next shot. "Damn, Naruto thought as he was again attacked from behind, he blocked the kick and used his power to throw his attacker into a tree. He saw it was Kaide and she masterfully maneuvered through the air to push of the tree and attack him. He blocked her punch and counter with his own only to have her dodge and try to sweep him from below. He rolled over her back and kicked out trying to hit her ribs only to have her roll away. Taking out one of his kuni he attacks her at 10th of his natural speed, but to Kaide this was the fastest she had seen anyone move. He seemed to leave an after image from where he was only to appear right in front of her and kick hard, sending her flying into some trees. He looked at the fallen girl and watches as she gets back up. Bakudo number 10. Horan, he said, and suddenly Kaide is trapped in an orange-colored rope that seemed to spiral all around her, give her no space to move. Naruto looked at her and smiled. 2 to 1 to go, he thought to himself as he prepared to go after Mana. Mana was tried to locate Naruto after she lost sight of him from Kaide ATTCK, so far she had yet to see him. All of a sudden his voice filled the air and he said, Hado number 31, Shakaho, and a ball of red light flew towards her position. She picked up her rifle and moved out of the way and watched as the red light blow up the spot she was at before. She tried to get a fix on where it came from only to feel cold steel against her neck. You make 3, he said as her relieved her of her guns. He walked back down with her, his kuni still at her neck. They reached the tree to see Kono and a man with a white suit standing next to the base with a struggling Setsuna and a bound Kaide. Kono was quite impressed with Naruto's quick and decisive victory over the girls and he only used what seemed to be a 10 of his power. Setsuna was still trying to figure out how he had binded her arms while Kaide wanted to spare again. Mana was impressed with his skill but was wanting him to remove the kuni from her neck. Kono laughed at Mana's predicament and said, "Can you release her?" "Oh yeah," Naruto said and removed the kuni from Mana's neck. Next he waved his hand and the 2 spells holding the other girls disappeared. After a few minutes everyone was back on their feet and ready to go, but as Naruto began to walk away the man in the suit stopped him. "I here to show you to your room," he said to Naruto with a smile. "Lead on," Naruto said with a bored sigh. The girls watched him walk away with Takahara-sensei and were surprised that he had beaten them so easy and was not even tried. They collected their things and headed towards the dorms. A while later they enter the dorms only to see a large group of girls huddling around near Kaide's room. "What's going on?" Setsuna asked out loud, causing some girls to turn around. A pink-haired girl wearing a leotard started to say, "It all started." "And that what happened?" Sakurako said as they watched Naruto head out of the dorms and set fire to everything in front of Ayaka. "Well, that was interesting," Mana said and proceeded to go to her room. A little while later Naruto was sitting in the now Negi-free room with a crying Ayaka on the bed. He knew that doing that to her was cruel but it had to be done. He sighed to himself before turning to face her. "That was for your own good." "Why?" she said through her tears. "Simple, I think you need to find someone your own age to like," he said. But she started only for Naruto to stop her. "You are a smart, beautiful, and graceful young woman, who is going after a child who would not appreciate that aspect about you at all till he is older," Naruto said looking at her. "I know about your dead baby brother, but you can't let that stop you from loving guys your own age. What would happen if he would reject you when you tell him?" She looked at him and began to think about his words. What would happen? Naruto left her to ponder their talk and headed to bed. Before he fell asleep, Ayaka turned to him and said, "I don't care what you say, he will love me." He looked at the girl and said, "I am here to keep you safe even if it from yourself." Naruto stretched as got up. It had been a rough day the other day and was glad to start another one. He got out of bed and turned to see Ayaka asleep on the top bunk. After their little spat last night he had left her to her own devices and unpacked. He watched her sleep for a few more minutes, a slight blush on his face. She is very beautiful, he thought to himself as he started his morning routine. A few minutes later the door to the bathroom closed and the shower was turned on. Ayaka woke up refreshed and ready for the day. She was still angry at her new roommate for what he had done and said the other night, but some of the things he said stayed in her mind. Would Negi-sensei love me back? She thought as she got out of bed. I love Negi, but how do I love him? Is it romantic or as a brother? She continued this train of thought as she got her breakfast ready. She looked back at everything that had happened since Negi had gotten there and saw that she was not really a part of his life at all. She saw him during class and in the dorms, but he never would hang around her except for the time he came by her house. He was always with Asuna or one of the other girls. She sighed to herself as she ate only to see the bathroom door open and a half-naked Naruto walk out. She just stared at his well-built body, his perfect six-pack and all the scars he had. One stood out in particular. It was a large scar the size of a fist near his heart. There was an identical one on his back. What could have caused that? She thought as she watches him grumble under his breath about forgetting a change of clothes. Naruto turned around and saw Ayaka staring at him. He smiled and thought, at least she likes guys her age. Not miss a chance to mess with the other blonde. Naruto turned around and faced her. Like what you see? He asked with a fox-like grin. Ayaka blushed for a moment before quickly shaking her head. Naruto walked over to her and whispered into her ear, "That's too bad, I might have let you see the other half." Ayaka ran for the bathroom after this. Naruto just stood there laughing and headed back towards the bedroom to change. Ayaka hid in the bathroom with a huge blush on her face. No matter how hard she tried, it would go away. Her body felt very hot. "I need a cold shower," she said to herself. A while later she came out of the bathroom and saw Naruto eating breakfast. She was fully clothed and had the foresight to bring her uniform with her into the bathroom. "That was a dirty trick," she said to him sitting down at the table. "I didn't see you complang," he replied with a chuckle mid-bite. She gave him a dirty look before going to collect her things. She hated that after one day on knowing him he could get under her skin faster than Asuna. She looked at the time and headed out the door with Naruto close behind. Naruto headed out of the dorms and slowly walked towards the school. He observed everyone as they walked and saw Nodoka walking with her head in a book again. He shook his head and tried to think of a way to cheer her up. He started to head over to her only to have Negi walk in front of him. "Good morning, Naruto," Negi said with a smile. Naruto nodded back and headed again towards his attempted target. Negi watched as Naruto headed towards Nodoka with a frown. Why is he going over to her? He thought but dropped it as he ran to catch up with Asuna. Nodoka walked down the street to class not paying attention to anyone near her. From years of reading while walking she had developed a way to sense people near her while walking. This helped her avoid most obstacles, but it seemed it didn't pick up a person in front of her in time. She tried to avoid them but quickly tripped over her feet. Suddenly she was caught by two strong arms. Looking up she saw Naruto's smiling face above her. "We really need to stop meeting like this," Naruto said with a chuckle. Nodoka blushed deeply and nodded her head. He set her on the ground and they continued to walk towards the classroom in silence. Nodoka kept her face in her book while Naruto walked beside her. Tired of the silence, Naruto looked at with a smile and said, "What you reading?" Nodoka squeaked at the sudden sound and turned to look at Naruto. "A romance novel." She replied quietly. Naruto nodded then said, "What type of books do you like to read?" Nodoka was caught off-guard at first but answered the question soon. They were having a great conversation over different kinds of books and series. As they approached the school building, Naruto reached into one of his pouches and pulled out a small book. He held it out so Nodoka could take it before speaking. "This is my favorite book of all time. It is called The Tales of the Gusty Ninja. I think you will like it." Nodoka took it from him and nodded. While this happened she thought to herself, he is a nice guy after all. "Thank you," she said with a smile. Naruto saw this and smiled back. "You're welcome and you have a wonderful smile," he said before walked away from here. Nodoka blushed deeply as she heard this. She walked into the classroom with the book close to her heart. Haruna saw the book and said, "Where you get that?" Nodoka blushed for a second before she answered, "A friend." "What kind of friend?" Haruna asked. She had noticed the blush on Nodoka's face when she was talking. "A nice friend," Nodoka said as she sat down. "Is this nice friend a boy?" Yu asked as she joined the conversation she had been listening to. Nodoka didn't answer, confirming both of Yu and Haruna suppositions. "Did you get it from Negi?" Haruna asked as she nearly bounced out of her, shook her head and started to open the book. They saw that she was not going to tell them and let her read, telling themselves they would find out later. Ayaka was sitting at her desk daydreaming about her and Negi. She was sitting at her desk in the class all alone in the daydream when Negi walked in. He was wearing his usual suit and walked over to her. "How are you today, Ayaka?" Dream Negi said. "I am wonderful," Ayaka replied with a happy tone. Dream Negi smiled then replied, "I am glad you're having a good day. I was wondering if you could help me with something." "Yes, anything," she said to him, willing to do anything for him. Even. She giggled like a curtained white-haired pervert. Negi smiled before he suddenly turned into Naruto. "Can you stop lying to yourself and see what right in your face?" Ayaka sat up quickly looking around the class and saw that everyone was sitting around talking. She shook her head trying to get the dream out of her mind. "I love Negi," she said to herself over and over, not paying attention to the people around her. Naruto walked into the classroom and sat in his usual corner. He looked at the class and smiled. Today was going to be a good day. Negi came in and started the lesson but noticed that Ayaka was not paying attention like she usually did. He walked over to her and touched her shoulder, causing her to jump. As she jumped, he heard her mumble, "I love N." Negi looked at Ayaka and smiled. "If you would be so kind as to pay attention, it would be much appreciated." She just nodded and turned to face the board. As Negi walked away, he thought about what she had said. Whose name starts with an N, he thought, and he turned to look at the bodyguard in the corner. He smiled and thought, Ayaka must love Naruto. Well, I try and help her any way I can. He quickly went back to teaching and decided to talk with Kanoka and Asuna about what he had heard. While this was going on, Naruto was quietly sharpening his kunai, not paying attention to the class at all. As he sharpened, his Shinigami senses went off, telling him that there was a lost soul nearby. He looked around but saw nothing as the feeling went away. Suddenly the bell rang, causing Naruto to cut himself with the sharpened kunai. As his blood started to flow, its scent caught the attention on a certain vampire in the back of the room. Evangeline was enamored by the smell of blood. To her it was the most heavenly scent on earth. Naruto looked up and paled when he saw the short blonde staring at him with hunger in her eye. "Why do I have the feeling I'm going to need to run?" Naruto thought as he watched her get up and walk over to him. "Can I help you?" Naruto said as the girl stood in front of him. The young girl looked at him and saw him covering his cut. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Just fine," Naruto said, getting up and picking up his things. "Are you sure?" she asked. Naruto just nodded and headed on his way, only for the hair on the back of his neck to stand up. He turned his head and saw the look of hunger in the girl's eye. He headed out of the classroom and tried to shake the feeling off. Evangeline tried to control her hunger, but after smelling the bodyguard's blood, she wanted to taste it. She waved for Chachimaru and started to create a plan to get a taste of the heavenly blood. Naruto sat at a cafe and tried to relax. It had been overall a good day, but he could shake the feeling something or someone was out to get him. "I am just being parioned," he thought as he ate. Nodoka was walking when she noticed Naruto sitting by himself at the cafe. She wanted to thank him for lending her the book. Since she started it, she had not been able to put it down. She looked around before heading over to him. Little did she know Yu and Haruna were tailing her. They watched her approach Naruto with interest. Nodoka walked over, trying not to blush as she tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around and smiled. "Hey, what up?" he asked with a smile. I was wondering if you would like some company," she said, trying to hide her blush under her hair. "Sure, I love some," he said, and Nodoka smiled and sat down. While this was going on, Yu and Haruna were wondering what had happened to make them so friendly with each other. "Nodoka is never this forward with a guy," Yu said as they watched the two talk and laugh. "I know it, but it's nice to see her happy. She has been kinda down for a while now." Haruna replied while taking out her sketch pad and started to draw. "Yeah, true. Hey, what are you doing?" Yu said as she watched Haruna draw her friend and the bodyguard in compromising positions. "This is too good of material to pass up. Just think of the possibilities," Haruna replied and began to ramble of different scenarios that she could put Nodoka and Naruto in. Yu just shook her head and went back to watching the seated pair, trying to ignore her perverted friend. Nodoka was having a great time sitting and talking with Naruto. He was always nice and even paid for her food. They have talked non-stop since she got there. She didn't know why, but she was very comfortable around him. she didn't stutter as much and he was always making sure that she was okay. Naruto was happy just to have a friend. Nodoka was a nice girl, just needed people to help her get out of her shell. He checked the time and saw that it was getting late. He called for the check and stood up and held out his hand to Nodoka. "Shall we be on our way?" he said with a smile. She nodded, glad for her hair hiding her blush once again, and took his hand. He helped her out of her chair and they headed on their way. Yu and Haruna watched the scene with awe, but soon followed right after. As Naruto and Nodoka walked to the dorms, they fell into a comfortable silence. When they reached the dorm, he walked her to her room. "Had a lot of fun hanging out with you," he said with a smile. "It was a lot of fun," she replied. "Yeah, it was," he said. "Well, I see you tomorrow," she said, and was about to turn and open her door when Naruto stopped her. He had gotten closer and moved her hair from the front of her face so he could see her eyes. "That's better," he said, looking at the blue-haired girl. "You have a cute face, don't hide it." Nodoka nodded as she turned red as a tomato. Naruto backed away and waved a goodbye. Nodoka just stood by the door before fainting from sheer bliss. Yu and Haruna watched what had happened and were happy for their friend, but first they had to make sure she survived long enough to get anywhere. Naruto whistled a tune as he entered his room. He had a good day and there were no attacks and no one was trying to kill him. Suddenly a shoe was flying at his head. Naruto sidestepped it and looked around to see that Ayaka was seething with anger. "You!" she shouted and launched another projectile at him. "Yes, me," he said, wondering what the hell he had done to get her this angry. "You stay out of my dream," she shouted, and Naruto gave her the most confused look. He didn't even try to dodge the object thrown at him. Ayaka saw that he had no idea what was going on and she turned around. "Just forget it," she said, embarrassed. She had taken her anger out on him when he did nothing, but she could help but wonder why did Negi change into him in her daydream. After she had left, Naruto finally snapped out of his stupor. "Stay out of my dreams," he thought to himself as he gathered his things for a shower. Is she mental or something? He was about to enter the bathroom when there was a knock at the door. He walked over and saw Negi was standing there. "What's up?" he said. Negi smiled and looked at Naruto, seeing that he was getting ready to take a bath. "Are you going to the bathhouse?" "There is a bathhouse," Naruto said with surprise. A nice soak would be nice, he thought. Negi nodded and led the way. Naruto entered to the large bath area and smiled. "Now this is what I need." Naruto set his thing up and relaxed in the water. Negi sat next to him in silence. "Naruto," Negi said, "what do you think of the girls?" Naruto thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, they are a good bunch. They get scatter-brained at times, but they seem to be very happy." "Yeah, I see the same," Negi said with a smile. "Do you have any girl you like in particular?" Naruto stared at the younger boy and gave him a dirty look. "That is not for you to know." "But you do like some girls from the class," Negi said. "Yes, I do find some if they're rather attractive," Naruto replied, looking up at the ceiling. "But that is for me to know and for you to butt out." "Oh, come on, give us the debts," a voice said from behind them. Naruto turned around to see a white weasel-type creature standing there smoking a cigar. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto said, looking down at the little animal with interest. "That Camo. He a friend of mine from back home," Negi said. "He helps me out." "That's nice," Naruto said. Camo smiled and gave them a nice guy pose. "Yes sir, I am the one who helps Negi get the hotties and the Pactios." All of a sudden the area turned colder and Camo looked up at Naruto, who seemed very angry. "What do you exactly mean by that?" he said to the Camo with venom as his voice. "I help him get kissed by the girl and make a Pactio," Camo said. Naruto grabbed him and held him firm. "You are corrupting innocent minds for your own gain," Naruto said, his eyes suddenly turning red with slits. "Oh, of course not," Camo said, not looking Naruto into the eye. "You cannot foul the eyes of a Shinigami," Naruto said as when a blade suddenly appeared in his hand. "Time to die for your crimes." Negi watched in horror as Naruto was about to stab Camo, but suddenly the sound of talking filled the air. The entire class entered the bathhouse and saw Naruto standing with a kunai posed to stab Negi's pet, but that was not the thing they noticed. What they noticed is that Naruto was completely naked and the only thing covering his lower parts was the steam. Many of the girls had nosebleeds from the sight of his fit body. The two who seemed the most captured by him were Nodoka and Ayaka. They couldn't take their eyes off him. Naruto finally noticed the class standing there and quickly dropped camo and grabbed a towel. Hey, he said as he blushed in embarrassment, didn't see Yui there. We can see that, said Ked with a hint of lust in her voice, and everyone in the class nodded in agreement. Are you going to let me out? Naruto said to them only to see that they were actually thinking about this. What is wrong with these girls? He thought as he noticed them huddle together, then look at him and giggle. I am so dead. I sorry but we can't, Ked said. Why is that? Naruto asked trying not to use his powers on them. You were here first and need to finish, she replied. I am almost done, he said taking a step back. You can finish, no one stopping you, said Haruna with a perverted giggle. Naruto looked at them and sighed. He pulled the tower tighter around and headed towards the door only to have half the class block his path. He walked to the other exit to find it blocked too. He shook his head and got back into the bath. He started to head back into the water only to trip and fall. He tried to right himself but it only made it get worse. He fell right into Ayaka. As they fell both lost their towels. Naruto saw Ayaka in all her glory and Ayaka saw Naruto in his. No, Ayaka yelled at the top of her lungs. Naruto was sat by the window in the classroom a few days after the bathhouse incident. Ayaka had prominently kicked him in the jewels then ran as quickly as possible back to the room. She hadn't even looked at him for days and whenever she did look at him it was with rage. Ayaka was so mad that Naruto was the one to see her body and not her negi. She was seething, she had completely forgotten everything he had said to her and wanting nothing more than to push him out the window. She even went so far as to kick him out of the dorm room. When Naruto arrived after back at the room from the bathhouse he found all his things in a pile by the door with a note on the door stating he was barred from entering. Needless to say Naruto was now homeless, not that this was not new to him. So he had spent the past few days sleeping in the world tree. He was quite happy he remembered to pack his camping gears. He watched the class inside, it was getting dangerous just living with one of them. As he looked around he saw the little blonde girl in the back staring at him again. It had been days and she wouldn't stop, it was started to creep him out a little. He opened his file and looked for her picture but no matter how hard he looked it was not there. At first this unsettled him but as he continued to look he saw he was missing a lot of pictures of the girls. He only had a few and the profiles were about their likes and dislikes. Great incomplete information, he muttered to himself as he shut the file. He again turned and looked out the window. Nodoka glanced over at Naruto wanting to talk to him. She was there at the bathhouse when he trying to get away. She was fascinated by him, he was very fit but what intrigued her most were his scars. He had scars all over his chest and back, the most notable one was the fist-size one near his heart. What caused all those scars, she thought to herself as she watched him looking out the window. Yu and Haruna watched their friend, they could see that she was falling for the new bodyguard and had completely forgotten about Negi. Haruna thought this was a gold mine for her new manga she wanted to write and Yu just wanted to help her friend. Yu looked at Naruto and then looked at Nodoka. She turned towards her friend and said, "Did you know that Ayaka kicked him out?" Quote. Nodoka replied with surprise. "Yeah, she did," Haruna said entering the conversation, "and now he has no place to stay." "That's too bad," Nodoka said but was pondering the idea of inviting him to room with them. Yu saw Nodoka thinking about it and quickly gave a nod to Haruna. "You know we have room," Haruna stated plainly, "maybe one of yous can ask him to room with us." Nodoka turned beet red at the thought of rooming with Naruto. "Me? Alone? With him?" She thought and turned even redder. "I think Nodoka should ask," Yu said causing her to come out of her thoughts. "Why me?" she asked with the blush still on her face. "Simple, you're the only one who knows him," Yu stated, "it would be easier for you to ask him than for either me or Haruna." Nodoka tried to argue but couldn't, it was a sound argument, she was the one who seemed to know him the best. "I will ask him," she said turning red again. Yu smiled and Haruna giggled to herself. While this conversation was going on Evangeline was watching Naruto with hunger. Ever since she had smelt his blood she wanted it. There was something about it that made her body scream for it. She turned to the green-haired girl with a knee sticking out of the sides of her head. Chachimaru, I want you to follow him and see what you can find out about him. Yes, master, Chachimaru said and turned to watch Naruto, recording everything he did. Naruto turned and got up as the bell rang. He headed towards the world tree so he could be by himself. As he stood at the base of the tree, he looked around to see if anyone was near him. Next, he sent a chakra pulse to make sure and saw that he was alone. Satisfied that he was alone, he began to set up barriers so he could train in peace. While he was doing this, Chachimaru had entered the area. She hid herself quickly and watched as he finished setting up the barrier. He went to the middle of the area and moved his hands into a cross-shaped seal. Kage Bushin, he said, and suddenly 10 clones of the blonde appeared. Chakahamaru watched with interest and he gave orders to the clones. Soon he was surrounded by them and they all had their weapons out and ready. The real Naruto reached and grabbed the scythe from his back. With a quick flick of his wrist, it unfolded and locked into place. The blade was blood red with a design on a 9-tailed fox going over the blade. He bent his knees and took a solid stance, the scythe held in his right hand. Nodding his head, the clones attacked. The first clone came head on and tried to slash the real Naruto with a kunai, only to have it blocked and the scythe pole pushed into its chest, causing it to dispel. Soon all the other clones were attacked and Naruto dispatched them all. He stood in the now empty field looking around. Chachimaru watched as he seemed to be looking for something. He turned and it seemed he was looking at her. You can come out, Naruto said, causing Chachimaru to jump from the surprise. She thought she was well hidden. Seeing that she could no longer hide, she stepped out into the field. You the robot from the class, Naruto said as he looked over her. He had to admit if she was human she would be quite the looker. Yes, my name is Chachimaru, she said. Naruto nodded but kept his weapon unfolded. Why are you here? He asked. My master wished for me to watch you. She answered plainly. Naruto gave her a serious look and debated on whether or not to kill her. Who is your master? He asked, deciding to find out who the mastermind was and kill them instead. I cannot tell you that, she said as she started to take a stance. Why is that? He said, bring both hands onto the scythe pole. You may try to harm master, she said and prepared to attack. You really care for you master, don't you? He said as he brought the scythe blade to bear. More than anything, Chachimaru replied. She watched as Naruto's eyes suddenly changed to red with slits. He seemed to be looking at her and she didn't know why. She has a beautiful soul, he muttered to himself. Chachimaru looked at him. His lips were moving but nothing was coming out. She shrugged it off and watched as his eyes turned blue again. Not taking any more chances, Naruto charged forward, bringing his scythe across his body into a side slash. Chachimaru ducked and rolled back. She stood up only to have Naruto bring his scythe upward slash. She quickly dodged and tried to punch him in the side. He stopped it by using the flat part of the blade. The two combatants broke apart and looked at each other. Naruto was smiling, seeing that she was keeping up with his attacks. Chachimaru was thinking that he was someone that could beat her easily if he wanted to. It seemed to her that he was deliberately holding back so they could fight on equal terms. Chachimaru relaxed and bowed to Naruto. Thank you for the spare, it was quite interesting. Naruto face panned and looked at her. Spar, sure, we'll call it that, he muttered. Chachimaru giggled at his antics. Naruto just shook his head and walked towards her. It was fun, he said and started to dispel the barrier. Chachimaru watched as he did this and went back over her recording of him. When she got to the part where his eyes turned red, she zoomed in on his mouth and started her lip-reading software. She has a beautiful soul, the voice said in her head, causing her to look at the bodyguard with surprise. I have a soul. Chachimaru left quickly and went to report to her master, leaving Naruto all by himself. He had to admit it was a fun spar and would like to do it again sometime. As he headed into town, he failed to the library trio following him. After they have decided to ask him to room with them, they had spent the entire time looking for him. They finally found him as he leaving the forest and heading towards a little cafe. Nodoka was nervous about asking him to room with them. He was always nice. What if he rejected her like Negi? Haruna and Yu watched as their friend with her internal struggle inside. Yu walked over to Nodoka and pushed her forward. Nodoka, not prepared for the sudden push, fell forward only to be caught by Naruto walking by. Hey, Naruto said with a smile as he helped her stand. Hello, she stammered as she tried to hide her blush. You okay? He asked her with a smile. Just fine, she replied with a nod of her head. Naruto nodded and proceeded to ask if she would like to join him for dinner. Nodoka nearly fainted at the thought but kept herself awake. Naruto didn't think anything of it, he just wanted to hang out with someone. As they walked through town, Nodoka kept her head down trying to figure out if this way a date. They reached their destination, which was a small little Italian restaurant. They entered and sat down. Soon a silence settled between them. Naruto, tired of the silence, was about to ask a question when Nodoka said, "How is staying with Ayaka?" Naruto looked at her thinking of his former roommate and sighed. She kicked me out after the bathroom incident. Really, that was mean of her. She said to him, trying to work up the nerve to ask him to room with her. It's okay, I've been doing alright. He said, not wanting Nodoka to worry. She nodded as the food arrived. They ate in relative silence, not knowing what to talk about. Nodoka was losing her nerve about asking him but saw Yu and Haruna hiding behind a potted plant giving her the thumbs up. She mouthed thank you to them and smiled, getting her shaky confidence back. Naruto, she said, getting his attention. Yeah, he said with a fork full of spaghetti in his hand. I was wondering. She began but stopped and started to blush. Go on, Naruto said. Was wondering if you would like to room with me. She said very quickly. Naruto looked at her in awe. She wanted him to room with her. I'd like that, he said to her with a smile, making her blush more. He was never one to turn down a clean room and a bed. After that, the mood lightened and they were laughing and having fun. After dinner, they headed out of the restaurant and walked towards the dorms. Naruto suddenly stopped and hit himself in the forehead. I forgot some of my stuff at my camp. He said to Nodoka, I meet you at the room K. She just nodded and watched him run in the opposite direction. Yu and Haruna walked over to her and smiled. Where is he going? Yu asked. Naruto walked towards the base of the world tree. It was a very dark night and the moon was blocked by the clouds. This didn't bother Naruto and her continued on his way. As he walked, the sound of footsteps filled the air. He turned around to see Chachimaru and Evangeline standing behind him. What do you want? Naruto said, annoyed at the pair's antics. Chachimaru looked at Naruto with interest. She wanted to ask about what he said earlier, but with her master here she rather not. Evangeline, on the other hand, was ready to pounce on Naruto and suck him dry. My master wished to feed. Chachimaru said to him. Okay, then go to the market and make dinner. Naruto said sarcastically. I don't want normal food, you idiot. Eva said, obvious annoyed by the blonde's remarks. I want your blood. Naruto paled. Don't tell me, he said and watched as she showed him her fangs. Vampire. Naruto was fuming. Why the hell was there a vampire at this school? He hated vampires, they always seemed to want to suck him dry. What is it about Shinigami blood that drives them crazy? He thought to himself. Now hold still, this won't hurt a bit, Eva said with an evil smirk, it will hurt a lot. Oh hell no, Naruto said and pulled his scythe from his back. No, Kami, damn vampire is going to suck my blood again. In heaven. Kami is watching them and says with annoyance, why does he always use my name? Back to Naruto. What does he mean again? Chachimaru thought as she watched him take his stance. She had analyzed his battle style and took the appropriate countermeasures. She extends two blades from her forearms and took her stance. Eva gave a nod and Chachimaru shot forward, bringing her arm blades to bear. Naruto blocked using the flat part of his blade and pushed her away. He charged forward and brought the scythe into a side swing for Cha to block it with her blade, but she wasn't able to stand for very long due to the momentum of the scythe. She was thrown to the ground by the force of the blow and quickly rolled away as he brought the scythe down into a decapitating strike. Chachimaru got up quickly and tried to go on the offensive, but she could never penetrate his defensive area. His use of the scythe was superb, he used every part of the weapon. Evangeline saw that her partner was not faring well and cursed the seal on her powers. Naruto was just toying with the robot girl. In their earlier spar he kept his power to about 7%, making sure it was even, but now he was using 10% of his full power. Chachimaru was at a loss. She had analyzed his style, but no matter what she tried to do he would counter. Cha charged, then used one of her side booster to move to the side at the last second. She brought her blade towards his shoulder for him spin away. He used the force of the spin to bring the scythe around Chachamaru's neck and slam her into the ground. She tried to get up, but Naruto wouldn't have it. He quickly took out some long kunai and drove them into her shoulders, pinning her to the ground. Give up, he said as he held another kunai in his hand. I cannot, she said, and tried to get up only to have another kunai driven into her leg. Evangeline watched in awe as he had effectively stopped Chachamaru in her tracks. Listen, I don't want to have to kill someone with a kind soul, Naruto stated with a sigh, but if you keep on trying to attack me, I will have no other choice. My master's orders are absolute, Chachamaru said, and Naruto just shook his head. Fine, he said, and pulled out another kunai. As he was about to bring it down on Chachamaru's neck, he felt someone try to sneak up on him. He quickly backflipped over the attacker and holds the kunai to their neck. Evangeline was surprised. She thought she had the drop on him, but it seemed he was more experienced than she thought. You done? Naruto said, pressing the blade against her skin. Eva say that she was beaten, but she wasn't going to leave without a test. She turned her head, letting the kunai cut her a little and bite Naruto hard in the hand. Caught by surprise from the sudden movement, he dropped the kunai. Eva sucked as much blood as she possibly could. To her it tasted heavenly. The balance, the aroma, to her it was intoxicating. Naruto tried to pull his hand away, but she held on firm. While this was going on, Chachamaru had found a way to pull the kunai from her shoulders. As she got up, she watched Naruto pry her master off his hand. Damn vampires! Naruto shouted as he finally got Evangeline off his hand. Evangeline was so happy. The blood was so good and the power boost she got from it was great. It gave her some of her power back, but not much. Before she had any chances to test her abilities, Naruto grabbed her and threw her as hard as he possibly could. Eva watched as she flew away from the scene. Not having the ability to fly, she screamed. That will teach you to suck my blood, he said as he stood there watching her get smaller in the distance. Chachamaru walked over to Naruto and stood next to him. Naruto took his stance and asked, Are you going to attack me again? No, my master got what she wanted, so there is no need to fight, Chachamaru said. She looked and saw her master flying off into the distance, but did you have to throw her? Not really, he said to her with a sheepish smile. Chachamaru shook her head, trying to understand the blonde's antics. Before I leave, I have one question, she said to him. Shoot, he said as he turned to look at her. Earlier today you said I have a beautiful soul. What did you mean by that? She asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Exactly what I said, he said, looking at her as if she was stupid or something. She was about to ask him to explain when she noticed him walking away. She then remembered her master and ran off toward Evangeline. Evangeline had landed in a lake near her house. She swam to the surface and was fuming that he had the gall to throw her, but she knew it was worth it to get a taste of that blood and she wanted more. Chachamaru ran to her master and helped her out of the water. Are you okay? She asked the small her, only to get a nod. Evangeline smiled and licked her lips. I have to drink from him again, she said and smiled. Naruto felt a chill run down his back and knew that he would have to dodge the small vampire from now on. Damn vampires, he shouted and headed towards the dorms. Naruto woke up and shook his head. He was glad to be sleeping in a room but was never a big fan of sleeping on the couch. He looked over at the three sleeping girls and smiled. When he arrived in the room the night before, Nodoka had fallen asleep. Wait for him to come to the room. He picked her up and set her on her bed before heading to bed himself. He had to admit she was very cute when she was sleeping. He got up and started to make a thank you breakfast for them. Stepping into the kitchen, he starts to see what they have to eat. Nodoka slowly woke up to the smell of food filling the air. She lifted her head and wondered how she had ended up in her bed. She had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for Naruto to come. How did I get here? She said to herself, only to have you pop her head down from the top bunk, making her friend jump. He carried you to your bed after he got in, she said, and then went back to her bunk. Nodoka turned as red as a tomato. He carried me, she thought. Haruna was smiling at her friend's antics. She was the one who led him into the room the night before and watched him carry Nodoka. She had gotten so much material from that she could help but be happy that he was staying. You and Haruna had stayed up later and made plans to get them together. Haruna giggled and got up. Naruto noticed that they have gotten up and smiled. Food will be done in a few. He said to them and went back to cooking. The trio nodded and started to get ready. Nodoka was putting on her school uniform when Yu and Haruna walked over to her. So how do you plan to make him yours? Haruna said in a low voice so Naruto couldn't hear. Nodoka blushed and looked at her friend. What are you taking about? She said, trying to hide her blush. You can't fool us. Yu said to her friend. We know you like him. Nodoka looked at her friend and sighed in defeat. You're right, she mumbled to the delight of the pair. Haruna was picturing them together doing very intimate things and giggled perversely. Yu smiled and was happy her friend had found someone else to niece. Food's done, Naruto called, pulling the girls out of their conversation. They nodded and headed into the kitchen to see a meal of scrambled eggs with bacon waiting for them. The trio mouths watered as they smelt the food. Are you going to stand there or are you going to eat? He said, pulling the three out of the stupor. Nodoka began to walk over when Haruna, accidentally, tripped her, making her fall. Naruto moved and caught her, causing Nodoka to blush. Don't be hasty, the food not going anywhere. He said with a chuckle. Nodoka just nodded. He helped her stand and pulled her chair out for her. She smiled and sat down. He did the same for the other two and then sat down himself. The food was eaten quickly and soon it was decided that Naruto was going to cook as long as he stayed in their room. Naruto nodded and got up to get ready. The girls said they would take care of the dishes while he got ready. Naruto went to the bathroom and began to change. A few minutes later he was ready for the day. Picking up his scythe from its place by the wall, he started to head back to the kitchen when his cell phone went off. He picked it up and listened. He nodded and hung up the phone. He entered the kitchen to see that the girls had finished with the dishes. He turned towards them and said, I got to head to the headmaster's office. I will see you in the classroom. They nodded and Nodoka was a little disappointed. She wanted to walk with him to school. As he left the room he bumped into someone knocking them down. He looked down to see Ayaka on the ground. Watch where you're going, you. Oh, it's you. She said when she saw it was Naruto. Yeah, it's me. He said and held out her hand. She swatted his hand away and stood up on her own. I don't want you touching me, pervert. How am I a pervert? He said, getting annoyed. You saw me naked. She screamed at him with a slight blush on her face. Naruto facepalmed and got very annoyed. First off, it was an accident. Second, you also saw me naked. And third, I said I was sorry at least 5 times. He shouted back. You did it on purpose. She shouted back. Naruto was getting tired of this petty argument and said, I don't have time to spend arguing with a Shotokan. He walked past her and headed out of the dorms. Ayaka was fuming. She hated to be called that. Stupid pervert. She shouted and headed back to her room. Naruto was in a bad mood as he entered the headmaster's office. That girl had a way of getting under his skin like no other person. Stupid girls and their stupid problems, he muttered as he stood in front of the desk waiting for Kono to acknowledge he was there. Ah, Naruto, my boy, how are you doing? Kono said with a smile. Just great. Naruto replied with a sigh, just great. Really, it seems you made a few fans in the class, Kono said with a chuckle, causing Naruto to shudder. If you mean the vampire, robot, and my ex-roommate, then yeah, I made some fans. He said with sarcasm. Kono laughed at this and Naruto soon joined him. Thinking about it, it was funny. After they have laughed for a while, Kono turned to the task at hand. Naruto, as you know, summer break is coming up and the girls will be all over campus. Naruto just nodded and waited for him to continue. As you know, Negi is a magi and he is taking the girls who had formed a pactio to train with Evangeline. Naruto shivered at the name, causing Kono to look at him with curiosity but decided to overlook it for now. Since the rest of the class has nothing to do, I would like to have you to take the rest of the girls on a little camping trip. Naruto stared at him for a few minutes before shouting, What? You heard me, Kono said. I have to take them camping. Naruto said. Why? They need to get out into nature. Kono said, but Naruto could tell he was lying. He sighed, not wanting to do it, but a direct order from his client was absolute. Fine, I take them camping, Naruto said with a sigh. Kono smiled. He had gotten Naruto to show what he wanted. As Naruto left the office, he thought about the camping trip and was kinda glad he was going on it. I need time to train it kinda hard on the school grounds, he thought to himself as he entered the classroom. As the day wore on, Naruto thought of what he needed on the camping trip and what he should bring in case one of the girls got hurt. He didn't notice the bell ring and didn't see Negi try and get his attention. Negi stood in front of Naruto trying to get his attention, but nothing was working. He waved his hand in his face and poked him, but it didn't work. He shook his head in defeat. Ayaka was not one to see her precious Negi get down and went over to help. Hey, pay attention, Ayaka said and tried to punch Naruto. He reflex took over and he blocked the punch, and then quickly spun her into the wall. He pulled out a kunai with his other hand and was about to strike. Naruto looked at Ayaka and sighed. The class watched in horror and fascination at what was going on. Many thought Ayaka was going to die when they saw the kunai come out, but he had stopped in the end. Why did you try to punch me? He asked, letting go of her and putting the kunai away. I was trying to get your attention, you idiot. Ayaka answered back. You could have tapped me on the shoulder, it would have been a lot safer. He replied back to her with a little anger. Negi poked you in the face and you didn't move, what a tap would have done. She said, trying not to shout. Well, I just didn't notice. Naruto said sarcastically. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. She replied back, making Naruto mad. Thanks for the sarcasm, it is much appreciated. Naruto replied back with the same amount of sarcasm and turned from the girl. He looked down at Negi and said, what is it? Negi looked at Naruto and shivered. When Naruto was mad, you didn't want to make him madder than he was already. I was going to let you announce the activity you have planned for summer break for the girls who want to go. Negi said quickly, hoping not to invoke Naruto wrath. Oh yeah, Naruto said and messed with Negi hair. Thanks for the reminder, little man. Negi smiled and sighed in his mind, glad that Naruto wasn't mad. Naruto walked to the center of the room and faced the class. Well, I planning on going camping in a few days and was told some of you have nothing to do while school is out. Naruto said as he tried to think of what to say. So I was planning on taking anyone who wants to go with me. It'd be for about a week and a half, nice place to camp. I will have a meeting later on today at the base of the world tree, if you want to come meet me there. He looked at the class for a few minutes before heading out. As soon as he left, the class was abuzz with excitement. Camping sound great, Chizuru said with a smile. Zazie said, that sounds like a great idea. Chizuru said with a smile. Most of the girls looked upon the scene with amusement. Nadoko was excited and a little scared. She wanted to go but didn't know the first thing about camping, so she was having a tough time deciding. Yu and Haruna had already decided to help their friend and started to make a list of what they would need for the trip. Naruto sat at the base of the world tree and relaxed. He was glad to have some peace and quiet, but that was soon brought to an end when he heard a rustling sound from above. He looked up to see Evangeline coming down the tree with fangs ready to bite. He moved to the side and let her crash into the ground. Hey, you were not supposed to move, she said angrily as she got up. Naruto had backed away and had his hand on his scythe. I wouldn't have to move if you didn't want to suck me dry, he stated flatly as he waited for her to pounce. But your blood is just so good, Evangeline replied with stars in her eyes that made Naruto shiver. So I heard, Naruto said with a sigh. He sat down but with a knife ready if she tried to drink him again. So I heard you taking some of the class camping, Evangeline said as she tried to get the dirt off her clothes. Yeah, Naruto replied with little enthusiasm. As he thought about the camping trip, he failed to notice Evangeline get close enough to bite him, but he quickly stood up when he remembered some of the stuff he need to get. As he walked away, Evangeline watched crying anime tears. My dinner, she mumbled as he walked away. Naruto had spent most of the afternoon gathering items for the trip. He had the food, water, cooking supplies, and first aid kit. Man, I didn't think you need all this stuff for camping, he said to himself. He was used to camping with 1 to 2 other people, who knew how to camp like him. So taking a group of girls who seemed to have no camping experience at all was going to be interesting to say the least. As he sealed the rest of the gears away, he noticed the time and went to the world tree to meet his prospective campers. As he walked up the hill, he was surprised to see a lot of the girls had come. He looked over the crowd and saw Nadoka and her friends were there. He was glad for this because at least someone he liked would be going. Then he saw Ayaka standing there with a frown on her face. Didn't think she was going to come, Naruto said to himself and headed towards the group. Ayaka was in a bad mood, she didn't want to go camping at all. She wanted to stay here and spend time with her precious Negi. She wasn't going to go, but it seemed fate wanted her to. Flashback to earlier. Ayaka watched as Naruto left the room after announcing the camping trip. Many of the girls were excited about going and couldn't wait to get ready. Ayaka on the other hand had other plans. She was going to stay here and find a way to get Negi away from Asuna and her friends. As she planned to get with her precious Negi, Negi was planning on getting Ayaka closer to Naruto. He headed over towards Asuna and pulled her aside. "Hey Asuna, can I have some help with something?" he asked her. "What is it, brat?" she said. "It better be normal and not magicy." "No magic," Negi said, getting flustered. It took a few seconds for him to talk straight. "I was wondering if you would help me get Ayaka closer to Naruto." "What?" she shouted, causing the class to look over at them. Asuna just smiled and rubbed the back of her head. "Bad test score." Everyone nodded and went back to what they were doing. "What?" she said again, but this time quietly. "I overheard a few days ago Ayaka saying she loved Naruto." Negi said to her. "Are you sure that what she said?" Asuna asked, not trusting his info and also taking into account Ayaka's personality. "Are you sure that is what she said?" Asuna questioned Negi, who just nodded. She sighed to herself and shook her head. "Okay, I'll help." Negi jumped for joy. He leaned in and told Asuna his plan. Asuna nodded as she listened and snickered a little. To her this would get Ayaka to go on the camping trip, but with the right words she would go in a heartbeat. "That's the plan," Negi said with a smile. Asuna nodded and they headed over to Ayaka's desk. Ayaka was sitting quietly thinking of ways to get Negi alone. She smiled to herself and giggled a little. She was soon pulled out of her mind when the object of her desire was standing in front of her. "Hello Ayaka, how are you today?" Negi said with his signature smile. Ayaka was overjoyed that Negi was talking to her and quickly replied with, "I doing fine, how about you?" The conversation quickly dissolved into small talk as Negi waited for the right moment to his plan. He saw that she was getting a little bored of the small talk and started his plan. "So are you going on the camping trip with Naruto?" Negi asked innocently. When Ayaka heard Naruto's name she frowned. "No," she said. "That's too bad," Negi said with a fake sadness, but to the obsessive girl it seemed real. "Why's that?" she asked, hoping to find out what was wrong with not going. It seemed fun and I wanted to go, but I have some teaching things to do," Negi said. "I haven't done that much camping and was hoping you'd tell me what it's like." Ayaka was jumping for joy on the inside that her precious Negi wanted her help, but she still didn't want to go on the camping trip. "I sorry Negi, but I can't go." Negi saw that his plan was failing and Asuna stepped in to help. "Are you sure you don't want to go?" Ayaka nodded her head and Asuna put her part of the plan in action. "Well, that's too bad. I was wondering what would happen with Naruto all alone with the rest of the class." Ayaka's brain immediately began to picture what would happen. He saw Chizuru with her shirt almost off and Naruto standing over her with a perverted grin. "No please." Dream Chizuru said, and Dream Naruto leaned in. Ayaka stood up with a righteous fury. "I shall not let him lay a hand on any of them," she shouted, and all the class looked at her as if she was insane. Asuna smiled to herself as she watched Ayaka prepare for the trip. Flashback end. Ayaka was now standing with the rest of the girls waiting for Naruto to speak. Naruto looked out at the girls and smiled. "Hello everyone," he said, getting everyone attention. "Hello Naruto," they all said in unison. "Since you are all here, that means you're going camping with me," Naruto said with a warm smile, causing a few girls to blush. He made sure everyone was listening before he continued. He pulled out a stack of papers and started to pass them out. "In this packet is all the information on what to bring to the trip," Naruto said as he was handing out packets. "It has all the basic on camping and also has some instruction on what to do while in the wilderness." All the girls nodded when Zazie raised her hand. Quote, comma, dot, question mark, quote. Everyone looked at her with confusion except Naruto. "Good question," he said to the silver hair girl. "Yes, I will not be the only chaperone on this camping trip." The nurse Shirzura has decided to come along in case someone gets hurt. Ayaka looked on with a smile. With Ms. Mimato going, I can stay with my precious Negi, she said and started to leave, but Naruto suddenly appeared in front of her. Like I said before, if you are here you are going camping, he said to her in a firm tone. I don't have to if I change my mind, she said and tried to walk past him. Sorry, but you can't, he stated and gave her a smirk. By coming to this meeting you are obligated to go on the trip even if I have to drag you out of your room kicking and screaming. You wouldn't dare, she said with anger and tried to punch him in the face. Naruto grabbed her fist and twirled her into him. He wrapped his other arm around her and whispered into her ear. I dare. She blushed and struggled in his grip. He laughed to himself and let go of the blonde. Nodoka watched the scene with envy. She wanted Naruto to wrap his arm around her like that. Yu noticed this and was more determined than ever to get Nodoka with Naruto. Naruto turned to the class and smiled. Now if you need help finding everything, I am going to go shopping this Saturday with anyone who needs it. If you have any more questions, consult the packet or come ask me. He waved to the girls and headed back to the dorms with a smile on his face. This was going to be fun. Naruto sat at the base of the world tree waiting for the girls to gather so he could start the trip. After the meeting, it had been a crazy couple of days. When he said he would help with the girls get what he need, he didn't expect so many to come. As he watched the clouds, he didn't notice Chachimaru walk towards him. She stood a few feet from him waiting to see if he would acknowledge her presence. A few minutes had passed and he had yet to say anything. Excuse me, she said, drawing his attention. Naruto turned and saw her standing there. He smiled but quickly looked around to see if the little blonde bloodsucker was about. Chachimaru watched this and chuckled to herself at his antics. My master is not here, she said and watched him sigh in relief. Naruto walked towards her and stood by her. So what brings you here? He asked with curiosity. Chachimaru was silent for a few moments before turning to face him. I came to ask a question that has been bothering me since our battle, she said to him. He watched her and waited for her to continue. When we were fighting and you had me pinned, you said, I have a kind soul. Yeah, what about it? He said as if didn't matter. I am an android, how can I have a soul? She asked him with pleading eyes. He looked at her and saw that this was what was troubling her. He sighed to himself and thought for a moment. She watched his body language and saw that he was in deep thought. Suddenly he pulled her into a tight hug. She felt his warmth throughout her body. She had been hugged before, but she had never felt such warmth. He leaned in and whispered into her ear. If you can feel my warmth, you have a soul, he said, causing her eye to widen. Only those with hatred cannot feel this warm, but a kind soul should feel it just fine. Chachimaru was shocked as he just held her close. What he said had made no logical sense, but she felt in her body, no wait, her soul, that he was right. She had a soul, she was not just an android. Naruto let go of her and looked at her face. She looked like she was about to cry, but she couldn't. He leaned in again and kissed her softly on her cheek. Smile, it makes you look beautiful, he said after the kiss. Chachimaru just looked at him before pulling him close and pushing her lips against his. Naruto was surprised by this movement but soon was lost in the moment. Chachimaru broke the kiss and blushed. She didn't know why she did it. He made her feel happy and warm. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't be near him at that moment and she quickly ran off. Wow, Naruto said as he stood there, his brain short-circuiting and fainted. He was woken up a few minutes later by the library trio. Oh my head, Naruto said as he sat up. He looked around and saw the three girls. Did that really happen? He thought to himself before he heard his name being called. Naruto, Nodoka said, getting his attention. He turned to look at her but couldn't help but blush lightly. He hid it fairly easily, but if you looked closely you could see it. Yeah, what is it? He replied and smiled. Why were you laying on the ground? She asked, titling her head to the side. Naruto rubbed his head in embarrassment but didn't know what to say. Was Chachimaru really here or did he just eat the expired ramen again? I didn't get much sleep. He lied, hoping they would buy it. Yu looked at him and knew he was lying. He was a heavy sleeper and seemed to have no trouble sleeping the night before. Haruna thought the same thing but Nodoka bought it. That's okay, she said as he stood up. Naruto nodded and then proceeded to check if they had everything packed and ready to go. As the morning progressed, more and more girls came and he proceeded to make sure they were ready. He smiled and was glad he had a good turnout, but he paled when he heard the sound of wheels. He quickly turned to see Ayaka pulling along a large suitcase. Naruto looked at the girl and smirked. Walking over to her, he said, "What you have in there, a kidnapped Negi?" Ayaka looked at him with anger. "No," she shouted, "it all I need for the camping trip." Naruto quickly took the suitcase from her. "I will be the judge of that," he said and opened it. Inside were some clothes, enough to last the entire trip, toiletries, and a lot of Negi-themed items. Naruto shook his head and proceeded walked over to the base of the tree. Taking one of the extra camping backpack and equipment, he proceeded to unpack her suitcase and put it in there. He put everything except the Negi items. Throw the bag to the girl. He turned to look at her. "This is everything you need for the trip. Everything else in this suitcase is excess weight that you don't need," he said, then proceeded to light a match and set the suitcase on fire. Ayaka watched in horror as again her Negi-themed items went up in flames. "Why?" she cried. "Anime tears as the bag burned. You horrid monster, those were priceless." "I try," he said with a smile before going to check everyone else's stuff. After running a final check that everyone was packed and ready to go, he smiled. Naruto walked to the front of the group and said, "Everyone ready?" "Yeah," all the girls shouted with excitement. Naruto nodded and replied, "Alright, let's go," and proceed to load the bus. A few hours later, Naruto smiled as he smelled the forest air. He always loved nature, it was so much better than a city. Everyone was getting off the bus and getting their things. The library trio were talking amongst themselves about what plant they can identify with their forest plant book. The cheerleader trio was exciting about the large lake. The twins were the same as well as most of the class. Mana and Ked were looking forward to what Naruto had called the challenge hike. Ayaka was not that excited about doing anything, but she was glad to have time to relax and plan to get with her Negi. Naruto waved everyone over and made sure they had everything they have packed. "Okay everyone, the campsite is about a 3-mile hike from here," he said with a smile. Some of the girls were nervous about the hike, but Naruto gave them a reassuring smile. "It won't be that bad. There is a trail that goes all the way up there." Many of the girls sighed in relief. Naruto watched them for a moment before speaking again. "Okay, we are going to split into 2 groups," he said, causing the girl to look at him in confusion. "2 groups?" Chizuru said with curiosity. Naruto nodded and answered, "Yes, 2 groups. One group is going to lead by Ms. Minamoto while the other is going on the challenge hike to camp." "The challenge hike?" Chisame said, not liking the sound of that. Mana and Ked smiled and were looking forward to. Naruto noticed Chisame's discomfort and put a hand on her shoulder reassuringly. "The challenge hike is a 8-mile hike to camp over rough terrain," he said. "And you don't have to go on it unless you want to. Okay, now everyone going on the challenge hike over here by me," Naruto said and watched Zazi, Mana, Ked, Chio, and Ayaka walk over to him. Naruto expect 3 of the 5, but Ayaka was the surprise. He gave the other blonde a serious look before asking, "Are you sure you up for this?" "I am," Ayaka said with conviction. In her mind, if she could survive the challenge hike, she could get Negi to be hers. Nodoka watched the interaction and wanted to walk over to the challenge side, but she knew she wouldn't last. She walked over to Naruto and tapped him on the shoulder. "Will we see you at camp tonight?" Naruto thought for a moment before answering, "Depends on how the other keep up." He smiled. "Okay, be safe," Nodoka said and gave him a hug. He smiled and hugged her back. "I'll be fine," he said and gave her a big smile. Nodoka smiled back and walked back over to her friends. Soon everyone was ready to leave. Naruto turned and started to walk towards the treeline. "We'll see you later," he said and disappeared into the forest, followed by the 5 brave girls that took the challenge. The other group watched them leave before heading up the trail to the campsite. Naruto led the group through a deer trail through the forest that had many twists and turns. Soon the terrain began to get rocky. At first Ayaka thought it was going to be easy, but as the hike went on she saw that this was going to be much harder than she thought. Mana and Ked were having a lot of fun. They really liked the trail that Naruto was taking on them, and the challenge hike was living up to its name. They stopped for a while, allowing the last of the group to catch up. Ayaka slowly walked towards the waiting group, panting heavily. Having fun there? Naruto asked the Ayaka with a smirk. Ayaka gave him a dirty look as she rested for a moment. This is insane, she said, falling down on her butt. Naruto smiled and replied, I know it, great, right? Ayaka looked at the bodyguard with horror in her eyes. He's insane, she thought. No one find hiking this type of trail fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, Ked said with a smile while Ayaka looked at her and shook. Mana nodded in agreement and Chio said, this is awesome. You're insane, Ayaka shouted, causing most of the people in the group to laugh. Naruto looked at her and said, you're just figuring this out now. They rest for a few more minutes before heading out again. They traveled through the trees for a few more hours before resting for lunch. Naruto opened a pack of instant ramen and quickly lit a fire to boil the water. Mana, Ked and Zazie had some sandwiches they made while Chio ate a nukenin. Ayaka forgot to get lunch, so Naruto had given her a cup of ramen. She thanked him, thinking he would just let her starve. After everything was picked up and everyone was ready, they continued the hike. Back with the other group, they had reached the campsite and were setting up their tent and other camping gear. Nodoka helped up the tent that she was going to share with Yu and Haruna. When they first arrived at the campsite, they were surprised by how beautiful the area was. They were camping near a pristine lake that seemed stretched for a while. The campgrounds were clean and flat, so they didn't have to worry about sleeping with rocks on their backs. Most of the girls were excited and wanted to set up quickly so they could have fun in the lake. As they finished setting everything up, you noticed that Nodoka was looking around to see if the other group had arrived yet. They will be here soon, Yu said, reassuring her friend with a smile. Nodoka smiled and was glad for Yu's words, but she couldn't help that something bad would happen. Naruto was looking at the 5 girls gather around him and he smiled. They had made it through the first part of the challenge, which was the 4-mile hike to where they were now. They were currently at the base of a cliff. Halfway up was a ledge that it went up again to the top that had a forest on top. The 5 girls were wondering what they were going to do next and watched their guide. Good job on surviving the first part of the trip, Naruto said with a smile, making Ayaka fall over in shock. That was the first part, she said with horror in her voice. Naruto smiled and gave her an evil smirk. Oh yes, that the first part, he said. The second part deals with this. He pointed to the cliff and saw the girl's eye turn towards it. If we want to be keeping with the schedule, we have to reach the first ledge before the day is out. Ayaka looked at the cliff and pictured in her mind them climbing with their bare hands and falling off. Naruto looked at the fear in Ayaka's face and walked over to her, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. This is perfectly safe, he said to her, and then proceeded to explain how they were going to climb it. He made sure to pack all the safety gear before coming, so they were all set. I will be last, so I need one of you to take the lead, he said, getting a weird look for Chio and Ayaka. Why are you on the bottom? Chio asked. Since I have the most weight, I am the anchor for us, he said, so if someone falls, I weigh enough to stop the others from being pulled of the cliff face with you. Everyone nodded and Ked decided to take the lead. He nodded and handed her a walkie-talkie so they could keep in touch. Soon they were on their way up. They made good progress, but they took frequent breaks so they wouldn't tire out. As the climb, Naruto looked out from where he was and watched the forest below. It was a beautiful sight that made him smile. Even though this job was a pain, it was allowed him to see views like this. The sun was setting when they finally arrived at the first ledge. All of the girls were dead tired from all the climbing and walking they have done that day. Naruto was winded but was overall fine. The girls looked at him and saw that he wasn't even tired. Mana and Ked were impressed by his stamina, while Ayaka looked at him as if he was some kind of monster. Chio and Zazie were thinking the same as Mana and Ked but didn't say anything. Naruto began let the girls rest while he set up for dinner. He quickly cooked some of the canned goods he brought with them. Most of the girls were wondering where he kept all the food, but, while he smiled and thanked Kami for sealing scrolls. Kami place. You're welcome, she said with a smile. Back to the group. After everyone had eaten, he started to prepare to sleep. He noticed that Ayaka was sitting by herself near the edge. Not liking the leaving a pretty girl alone, he sat down beside her. Hey, are you okay? He asked with concern. Just fine, she said to him as she looked out. She just really wanted to be left alone, she was tired and just wanted to sleep. Naruto noticed this and let her be. Ayaka was getting up when she slipped on the edge, causing her to fall. She screamed and watches as Naruto jumped off after her. When Naruto heard her scream, he ran as fast as he could. As he free falls, he grabs a kunai from his bag that had ninja wire attached to it and threw it. It flew through air and embedded itself into the cliff face. Naruto reached for Ayaka and pulled her close. The wire pulled, but the kunai was pulled from the cliff by their combined weight. Naruto felt this and quickly let go of the wire. As they fell, Naruto pulled Ayaka as close to himself as possible. They reached the tree line and disappeared from view. Ayaka groaned as she opened her eyes. That last thing she remembers was falling off the ledge and Naruto jumping after her. She remembered him pulling her close and trying to slow their descent, but it didn't seem to work. She put her hand down to push herself up when she heard a groan from below. She turned to see that she was currently sitting on Naruto and that he was in bad shape. She quickly got off and looked him over. She saw that his breathing was shallow and one of his arms was broken. It seemed that he kept her safe when they were falling. She was glad that he had saved her, but she could see that he was not getting up for some time. As she started to assess the situation, she heard the chatter of a walkie-talkie. She looked down and saw one clipped to his belt. She unclipped it and listened. Out of the walkie-talkie came the voice of Ked. "Naruto, are you okay?" She asked, hoping for an answer. Ayaka was glad that they were still in range and pushed the bottom to reply. "This is Ayaka and was alright," she said before looking back at Naruto. "Well, I am alright. Naruto is badly hurt and I can't move him." Ked was frowning on the other end of the walkie. If he was hurt, then they need to get to camp so they can get help. She pressed the button on the walkie and replied. "How bad is it?" "His arm is broken and his breathing is shallow," Ayaka replied as she looked down at her fellow blonde. "Damn," was the reply for Ked. "The only thing we can do is go to the others and get help." "Wait, you can't leave us here," Ayaka began to say, but Ked cut her off by saying, "Naruto cannot be moved and you don't have anything to help him. Even if we came down to you, it will still be bad for him. We need help." Ayaka nodded to herself, knowing that Ked was right, and then said, "Okay, good." Ked said, "I'm going to head to camp with the others and be back down as soon as we can. Do you think you can make it back to the cliff face? We can send down Naruto and your gear." Ayaka looked around and saw the cliff face. "Yeah, I can see it, but how will I signal where we are?" "We're taking care of that," Ked said, and she soon heard the sound of rushing wind and saw Zazie land on the ground in front of her. She handed Ayaka her stuff and looked at her. "Okay, we're heading out," Ked said through the walkie, and Ayaka replied that it was okay. "What?" Ayaka said, trying to decipher the silent girl's musing. Zazie just pointed and towards the tree line. Ayaka got the message and led her towards the injured young man. As they reached Naruto, they noticed that he was awake. He was currently using his good arm to sit up and lean against a tree. Ayaka rushed to his side and kneeled down, then gave him a hug, causing Naruto to wince in pain. "You scared me, you idiot," she said, trying to hold back her tears. "Hey, it's my job to get hurt for you guys," Naruto said as he used his good arm to pat her on the back. Quote, quote. Zazie said and tilted her head to the side. Naruto noticed her and gave her a hurting smile. "I'll be good in a few hours," he said, causing Ayaka to look at him in confusion. "In a few hours," she said, getting angry and getting in his face. "You're seriously hurt and this will take weeks to heal." Quote, quote. Zazie said in agreement. Naruto shook his head and sighed. "Let's just say I heal faster than normal," he said as he leaned on the tree. He saw the camping gear and smiled. "I guess we should set up for the night." Ayaka and Zazie nodded and they start to set up their campsite. Naruto watched the work but decided it was better to set his arm. He took a kunai from one of his pouches and saw a few fallen branches he could use. He reached for them but they were out of his reach. He extended as far as he could before he fell over, landing on his broken arm. He tried not to scream in pain. Zazie noticed this and quickly ran over to him. Quote, question mark, quote. She said, looking at him. "I'm fine," he said, trying not to show pain, but when he tried to get up he fell down again and Zazie could see it in his eyes. She quickly got up and went over to Ayaka, After a few moments of talking, they both came over to help Naruto. Ayaka went and got the branches he wanted, and Zazie laid him down on the ground so they could set his arm. Zazie went to take a kunai from his pouch when he used his good hand to stop her. "Those are sharp," he said, not wanting her to get hurt. She just looked at him with a blank expression before giving him a reassuring smile. He let go of her arm and let her get the kunai. He watched as she cut the branches into the correct length for the splint, and soon his arm was set. Ayaka watched this and was glad they had sent Zazie down to help because she wouldn't know to do. At school she was in her element, but here in the wilderness she was at a loss. Naruto noticed Ayaka's sadness and sighed. "This girl is going to be the death of me," he thought to himself. "Hey Ayaka," he said, getting her attention, and waved her over. She walked over to him and he patted the ground beside him so she would next to him. "Yes, Naruto?" she asked as she sat down next to her. He smiled and leaned her head on her shoulder. Ayaka stiffened at this and didn't know what to do. Naruto," she stammered. "Just stay like this for a while," he said as he closed his eyes. Ayaka looked at him and saw him slowly fall asleep. She smiled as she watched his sleeping face. Zazie had started a fire and noticed Naruto leaning against Ayaka. Smile looked at them with a tint of jealousy in her eyes. Ever since she saw the blonde bodyguard, she had been interested by him. He seemed to give off the aura death, but he was a very nice person. She had watched his battle with Ked, Mana, and Setsuna. She was impressed by his skills but knew he was hold a lot back. Now she watched this scene unfold and she wanted to be the one in it. Ayaka looked at Zazie and knew she couldn't move. Not wanting to leave Zazie alone, she called her over and have bring a blanket over to cover all three of them. "You get on his other side," she said, but Zazie looked at her and pointed at his broken arm. She looked around before saw some bandages in one of his pouches. Ayaka slowly moved his arm and created a sling out of, made sure it was secure, and smiled. Zazie, satisfied with this, sat beside Naruto and the two girls were soon asleep as well. Back at the other camp, Nodoka and the others were sitting around the campfire having a great time making s'mores and telling ghost stories. Nodoka was still looking for other group, but they have yet to come. Suddenly the sound of rustling bushes filled the air. The girls turned and saw Mana, Ked, and Chao walk out of the trees. Everyone cheered, glad to see that the other group had made it, but when Nodoka saw the worried look on Ked's face, she knew her bad feeling was coming true. Ked ignored the others and headed start over to Shizuna. "Ms. Minamoto, something terrible has happened," Ked said, getting everyone attention. Nodoka listened as Ked told them what had happened and she felt all the happiness drain from her body. "Naruto, please be safe." In hell, someone was running as fast as they could, leaving a trail of blood in their wake. He heading towards the lifts. One of the people chasing him said. Soon a group of high-number Shinigami had set up a barrier of Bakudos, but alas, this did not stop the running man. His eye changed from onyx to red with a windmill-type design in them. With a quick wave of his hand, black fire covered the defenders, killing them instantly. He reached the lifts and headed up. "I coming for you, Dobi," the man said. Sasuke Uchiha had escaped. Back with Naruto and the girls. The sun came through the trees and landed on the sleeping trio. Naruto was the first to stir, and as he opened his eyes he felt some weight on his shoulders. He turned and saw Zazie and Ayaka sleeping on him. He smiled at this, but he had to wake them up. He was feeling better, but his arm had yet to fully heal. He wanted to head to the cliff face and set up there so it would be easier for the others to find him. Ayaka was the next to wake, and as she woke she could feel Naruto's eyes on her. "Sleep well?" he asked with a sincere smile, causing her to blush. She nodded and gave him a smile. Naruto was happy that she was safe, but he noticed that he felt the weight on his other side lift. Zazie looked at Naruto and gave him a blank look. Naruto posed the same question to her and he got a small smile. Happy that both girls were safe, he tried to get up, but as he did he felt pain in his chest. He sat back down and the two girls looked at him with concern. "It seemed not just my arm that is broken," he said. Both girls began to fuss over him as they assessed the damages they missed the night before. It seemed that he had broken 2 ribs as well in the fall. They checked his back to make sure there wasn't any cuts. His shirt was torn, but there was not cuts whatsoever. They made sure to bandage the wounds to the best of their abilities, before they started to make a light breakfast. Naruto watched them work and couldn't help but smile. It was nice to get away from the hassles of work, and he was kind of secretly thanking his mom for sending him there. He then noticed a very beautiful black butterfly flying towards him. He lifted up his good hand and it landed on his finger. As he listened to the silent message, his face began to pale. He watched the butterfly fly off and he started to push himself up. He grunted in pain but was soon standing. He leaned on the tree for support. Ayaka noticed this and walked over to him with worry on her face. "You need to rest," she said, but Naruto shrugged it off. "Something bad is going to happen," he said as he headed towards his gear. Zazie stood in front of him and blocked his pathway. Quote, "I sorry but I have to," he started to say when they heard the sound of an explosion fill the air. "He's here," Naruto muttered to himself and quickly moved past Zazie. Grabbing his bag with his good arm, he began to rummage through it till he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a few barrier seals and set them up against 4 equally spaced trees. Pulling up his sleeve on his left arm, he touched one, the seal summoning his scythe. He swiftly attached it to his back before facing the 2 girls. Ayaka watched this with confusion and fascination. She was about to say something about what he had just did, but he suddenly turned towards them. "I need you two to stay here," he said. "The seals will keep you hidden from danger. I am going to drive him away and hopefully bring him down." "What do you mean do you know what's going on?" Ayaka asked with a little fear in her voice. Naruto didn't answer but gave them a reassuring smile. "I won't let anything happen to you two," Zazie said and started to walk towards him, but Naruto held up his hand. "This is out of your league," he said. He looked her directly in the eye and continued. "I want you to be safe, so stay within the barrier." Both girls nodded and Naruto, satisfied with this answer, headed out towards the explosion. He moved quickly and soon found the source of the explosion. Standing in the middle was a black-haired boy whose hair looked like a duck butt, and he was wearing a white gi that was open with purple bottoms tied off with a large rope. He had a slim sword at his side. "So you did escape, Sasuke?" Naruto said with a frown on his face. "Of course I did," Sasuke answered with a cold expression. "It was only a matter of time." Naruto shook his head and pulled his scythe out. He undid his arm splint and got into his stance. Sasuke pulled his sword out and the 2 combatants stared each other down. Suddenly there was a blur of movement and the sound of blades hitting against each other filled the air. Naruto brought his scythe down in an overhead strike which Sasuke blocked, then kicked him in the stomach. Naruto cringed in pain but didn't let it deter him from the fight. He began to go through a series of quick strikes that Sasuke either blocked or dodged. The 2 broke apart from each other for a moment before attacking again. Zazie and Ayaka sat in the barrier worrying about their blonde guardian and wondering if he was alright. Soon they could hear the sound of metal hitting metal and knew the battle was underway. Ayaka was scared, but inside she knew that the Naruto would lay down his life to protect them from harm. During her time with him, she saw that he was always looking out for her best interest. Even when it seemed he was being mean, he always had her safety in mind. Even when it seemed he was being mean, he was trying to keep her safe. Zazie looked at Ayaka and began to walk towards the edge of the barrier. Ayaka grabbed Zazie's wrist. "Where are you going?" she said, looking directly at the blank-faced girl. Zazie said and looked Ayaka directly into her eyes. Ayaka saw her worry and pain in her eyes and finally began to understand her. "You want to go after him?" Ayaka said, and Zazie nodded. She let the other girl go and she started to head into the trees. "I am coming too," Ayaka said and went with Zazie towards the sound of battle. Naruto was panting heavily and was full of shallow cuts. It was made worse by the injuries that he had received the day before, so he was in constant pain. Sasuke was in also panting heavily, but not as much as Naruto. They soon started to attack each other again and it seemed that Naruto was slowing down. Sasuke took advantage of this and started to press the attack. Naruto defended the best he could, but he was soon taking more and more hits. Sasuke hit him in his ribs, causing Naruto to cringe in pain. Sasuke noticed this and pushed his advantage. He kept his attacks aimed for Naruto ribs. Naruto tried to dodge or block, but it seemed he was losing more and more strength with each hit. He quickly broke away for Sasuke and put his hand together. "Hado number 31. Shikaho," he said and fired it at Sasuke. Sasuke watched the spell fly towards him and moved out the way. He dodged the strike but was caught in the shock wave it produced. Naruto pressed his long-range assault with more red energy balls but Sasuke kept on dodging. Sasuke dodged the lasted strike and got in close only for Naruto to spin away from his punch. He put two fingers together and pointed them at point-blank range of Sasuke's shoulder. Hado number 4. Byakurai, Naruto said as a blot of pale blue lighting struck Sasuke in the shoulder. Sasuke roared back in pain from the bolt of lightning but Naruto was not done. He used his scythe pole to push him forward, used the momentum to kick Sasuke in the face. Then he launched himself in the air and prepared another spell. Hado number 63, Reikoho. A large blot of pure yellow energy descended on Sasuke at alarming speeds. He jumped out of the way but was caught once again in the attack's shock wave. Naruto landed and grimaced in pain but stood his ground. Holding his hand out he gathered Heat Chakra into his hand. Rasengan, he shouted and charged Sasuke. While this was going on, Zazie and Ayaka had just reached the battlefield. They had watched Naruto send attack after attack at the assailant and was not letting up. They watched as he ran toward the other young man with a spinning ball of blue energy in his hand. Naruto thrust his attack at Sasuke and Sasuke barely dodged, getting grazed in the arm by the spinning ball. He spun and charged lighting into his hand. Chidori, Sasuke shouted and drove it thought the blonde's shoulder. Naruto cried out in pain as Sasuke pulled his hand out. That's what you get, Dobi. Sasuke said with a smirk as Naruto fell to the ground. Naruto looked at Sasuke with hatred. He tried to stand but Sasuke used his foot to push him back down. He then drove a hard kick into the hole in Naruto's shoulder, causing Naruto to scream out in pain. The girls watched in horror as Sasuke attacked Naruto's injured shoulder again and again. Ayaka couldn't stand this and rushed out to help. Since she was trained in martial arts since she was little, she thought she could get the jump on the black-haired young man. Sasuke sensed someone coming towards him and swiftly dodged a punch. He turned and saw a young blonde-haired girl standing there, fist ready to strike. He looked down and saw the surprise on Naruto's face as he looked at the girl. Sasuke looked down at Naruto and smiled. I think I play with this one and let you watch her suffer. He said with an evil laugh. He quickly raced towards Ayaka and started a set of quick strikes. Ayaka dodges some of them but was hit by most of them. She was baffled by this guy's speed. She had never seen someone move this fast in her entire life. Sasuke was amused as he saw the girl try to fight back. Her moves were rather slow in his opinion and he lazily dodges every strike. While Sasuke was busy toying with Ayaka, Zazie ran over towards Naruto and began to look him over. He was badly wounded but it seemed that his smaller wounds were healing quickly. The hole in his shoulder was still the biggest problem and she tried to stop the bleeding. Sasuke was having a good time toying with Ayaka. She never hit him and he would only hit her lightly, but to her it felt like being hit by a large rock. Ayaka knew she was out of her league. Try as she might, she could do anything. Sasuke, seeing her confidence waver, pushed his attack. He punched her in the stomach hard and then kicked her hard in the side. Ayaka let out a gasp in pain as some blood flew out of her mouth. Naruto saw this and got up, ignoring Zazie's attempt to stop him. He rushed Sasuke and knocked him over and away from Ayaka. Sasuke looked back at Naruto and saw the fury in his eyes. This is what he wanted. Naruto mad. Naruto looked straight at Sasuke with anger. He put his hand together and said, Hado number 88. Hiryugekizoku Shintenraiho, a huge bolt of lightning rushed towards Sasuke at amazing speeds. Sasuke barely dodged and watched as Naruto stand there out of energy. Sasuke speed towards Naruto and punched him in the face. Naruto flew back from the force of the blow and landed hard on the ground. Sasuke walked over and pulled out his sword ready to strike. Ayaka watched as he walked slow over towards Naruto only to see Zazie run towards him with a kunai in hand. No! Naruto shouted as Zazie tried to stab Sasuke. Sasuke dodged the strike and stabbed her in the stomach. Zazie! Naruto shouted as he watched the tan girl fall to the ground. Naruto looked up at Sasuke with pure hatred. He tried to attack Sasuke but was batted away. Ayaka watched what had happened and tears streamed down her face. She watched her fellow classmate fall to the ground. Sasuke heard her crying and smiled. He slowly walked towards her and Ayaka tried to get away. Naruto, no wanting to see another person get hurt, got up and charged Sasuke one more time. With the last of his energy, he created Rasengan while he saw this and batted away the weak attack with ease. Naruto fell to the ground and tried to get up, but he was out of energy. Ayaka walked towards Ayaka and smiled. "You're coming with me." "No." She whimpered and tried to get away. Sasuke knocked her out and picked her up. Sasuke looked at Naruto and gave him an evil smirk. "If you don't want to lose this one like the other one, you will come and fight me at the top of the plateau over there." Naruto looked at where he was pointing and saw that it was towards the other campsite with everyone else. "I will kill you," Naruto said with venom in his voice, causing Sasuke to laugh. "I'd like to see you try," Sasuke said as he walked away. Naruto watched him walk away with the unconscious Ayaka. He cursed himself for not killing him before. Now Zazu was on the brink of death. Naruto dragged himself over to her and sat up. He picked himself up and set her head on his lap. She looked at him and gave him a small smile. She said, and Naruto laughed light smile. "Stupid," he said to her, trying to hold back his tears. "You shouldn't have done that." Zazie replied as a tear rained down his face. She lifted her hand and wiped it from his face. She leaned forward and kissed him, causing him to blush. His eyes turned red and he looked at her soul. She was fading fast and he wanted to stop it. As he watched her soul fade away, he remembered a way to stop it. His features became more animalistic, his grew fangs. Looking down at Zazie and gave her a reassuring smile. "Everything is going to be fine," he said, and he leaned in close and bit into her neck. He injected some of his power. Soon a voice for all around could be heard. "The Reaper, choose one to fight alongside of him. She is the owner of the pact." A seal started to appear on Zazie's neck. It was a golden fox with 10 tails. Soon 10 tails appeared behind Naruto and surrounded them in a